announced from the president's coronavirus guidelines for America, 15 days to slow the spread. First, listen to and follow the directions of your state and local authorities. If you feel sick, stay home, don't go to work, and contact your medical provider. If your children are sick, keep them at home. If someone in your household has tested positive for COVID-19, keep the entire household at home. Do not go to work, do not go to school, and contact your medical provider. If you're an older person, stay home and away from other people. If you're a person with a serious underlying health condition, they added pregnant women to that as well. They can put you at increased risk. Stay home and away from other people. And some of the more specifics, work or engage in schooling from home whenever possible. If you work in a critical infrastructure industry as defined by the Department of Homeland Security, healthcare services, pharmaceutical, and food supply, you have a special responsibility to maintain your normal work schedule. You and your employees should follow CDC guidelines to protect your health at work. And this was probably the biggest one out of this because it affects basically every restaurant, every kind of business, every kind of meeting, places of worship. It says avoid social gatherings in groups of more than 10 people.
Right.
That is very small when you think about it. That's a family meeting another family. That's about it.
So we're getting quite a bit of questions coming in about church meetings. And while some states have put restrictions in place, others have not. But let me tell you this. Here's what the law is. If a state or a county were to say, we think any gatherings over 10, because of the public health situation, is dangerous, it's called a content-neutral time, place, and manner restrictions. Those are constitutional. In other words, the court would uphold the restriction. So what I'm seeing a lot of churches do is utilize social media, other platforms, to get the message out. With the declaration of a national emergency, that authorizes the states to take what's called direct action. Now, there is a very important legal issue here, and that is it's under the taking clause. Can you take, this FDR did this, Truman did this in Youngstown Steel in times of national emergency. Can you take over industries? That is not what the president is proposing. Now, there are going to be those that try to argue that that's what it is. These are voluntary compliance rules. I want to be really clear on this.
Social distancing, actually.
I am, yes, to protect the American people from a health situation. I am reviewing this on a constitutional basis and see so far no constitutional issues that would prevent anything that the administration has put forward at this point. These are voluntary actions. They're not mandated. The question would be, if we want to flatten that curve, will the American people do it?
Are people following the recommendations without having to go and make them legally enforceable, where you start getting police having to enforce that? We don't want to get there as a country. We don't want to have to become the French or the Italians, where they're having to do it by basically a kind of system of almost martial law. We are still in the recommendations phase for the most part. And restaurants are still able to get food to you. Stores, they say, have no problem with their supplies. They just have to have time to restock. By the way, I went to that CDC site yesterday because I wanted to be familiar with it as we talk about it on radio. And I'm glad to say that it is a very, very well thought out site. Calling your doctor is better than going in. That's why telemedicine is so important. I'm a big fan of Mel Brooks, the comedian and movie producer, and his son Max did a video where Mel Brooks was inside the house. Mel Brooks is 93. He looks great. Yeah. And Max was outside the house and saying, if he got it, he's 47 years old, he would get through it probably with no problem. But if I gave it to my dad, who's 93, he would give it to Carl Reiner and Dick Van Dyke. Yeah. And we could wipe out an entire generation of the kind of historic foundation of our generational comedians. And while he was doing it in an upbeat way, young people, millennials, really need to help us that are over 60 here by avoiding places of exposure, which would then cause your parents or grandparents to be exposed as well. Again, the effect is, if we can do this kind of voluntarily with following suggestions, Dan, if we do it voluntarily, we avoid the chaos of the government having to come in and enforce it. But they will if we don't.
The government is trying to restrain from those actions. And it's if we follow the guidelines, if we respond orderly and with restraint, that we will prevent ourselves from having to get there. So in many ways, I really think it's incumbent on us to make sure that those restrictions don't become harsher. But look, I mean, if the spread were to explode, if we don't follow these guidelines, there's going to be a lot of pressure on the government to do that. So I would say it starts with us.